Don't get too comfortable, Roger. We'll be back up here in just shortly. I always thought that was a good way to start out. No. I was thinking about the lesson for tonight, and of course, a lot of times I have lads on my mind, and for lads this year in Bible Bowl, we're doing 1 Kings. And so I thought, well, 1 Kings, there's a lot of hard names in 1 Kings. So I tried to kind of cop out and get a little easier lesson with someone who is easier to say, and probably something that's familiar with every one of you, the story for tonight. But I labeled the lesson tonight, Solomon, where is your humility? All right, we all know about Solomon. We know what he's great for, but we're going to kind of look at some things that he did and the way he acted and kind of what went wrong there as far as him not showing humility as he became older in life as a king. In the book of 1 Kings, if you just wasn't much of a Bible scholar, you would think 1 Kings, well, who was the first king? Well, it wasn't Solomon, it was Saul, right? Saul was first. You would think when you opened up 1 Kings, which king are you going to read about? Well, it's actually the first two chapters in 1 Kings. You have the second king, David, die. So really 1 Kings should be labeled 3 Kings, if you're thinking of it, with common sense, right? But we have 1 Kings and we have 2 Kings. Well, why do we have 1 Kings and 2 Kings? Well, it was actually, probably more than likely, it was so long between all the verses that were written on all these different kings that in order for people to kind of break that up a little bit, they just made a first and then made a second. But typically 1 Kings pretty much starts with the third king, Solomon. When was it written? It's written about 500 years before Christ. Ultimately, Israel was never even supposed to have a king. Okay, a king, but Samuel, he could foresee that he was not going to be able to please the people. In 1 Samuel 8, verse 18, Samuel says to him, "And you will cry out in that day because of your king whom you have chosen. For you yourselves and the Lord will not hear you in that day." Samuel was finally done with it. He couldn't talk him out of it, and he just says, "You've made your bed, and now you're going to lay in it." God wasn't enough for the people just to serve under him, so they demanded this man, this physical form that would have to come and stand in front of them and tell them what to do. Saul, David, and Solomon will serve 40 years, each one. So we've had 80 years of a king that has reigned over the people in Israel. And in that 80 years reign, you had ups and you had downs. But for the most part, when Solomon becomes king in 1 Kings chapter 3, you're going to see that the people were actually pretty close to God. Solomon's dad, David, had them in a very good place. All right. So let's look at 1 Kings chapter 3. If you have your Bibles, open up there. And we're going to start at verse 5 and we'll read through verse 9 there. And it says, "At Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. And God said, 'Ask, what shall I give you?' And Solomon said, 'You have shown great mercy to your servant David my father, because he walked before you in truth and righteousness and uprightness of heart with you. You have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. Now, O Lord, my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David, but I am a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to be numbered or counted. Therefore give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours?'" Hold that. Stay there, and we'll be there for the most of the night in your Bibles. Verse 7 there says Solomon, he likens himself into a little child. Well, I wouldn't think he was a little child. He was not mature in maybe the spiritual aspect of walking with God, but he was probably an older teen, maybe a young adult in his 20s, and he had watched his dad create this amazing kingdom, powerful kingdom, large kingdom. And he was now to be in charge of this entire thing that pretty much it actually just kind of lands in his lap there. And he had much to learn. David had built him an amazing nation. In verse 6 there, it says, "You have shown great mercy to David, my father, because he walked before you in truth and in righteousness and uprightness of heart." He understood at that point in his life what made his father so great. Why did God seem to bless his dad when he had not blessed Saul? What was the difference there? Because of David's righteousness. And I figured Levi, he talked about some hardness of heart this morning, but we know that David, in the end, was a man after God's own heart. Solomon had a lot to get done. He wanted a lot of things. So in this dream that he has with God, he asks for wisdom. Give your son, verse 9, understanding of heart. Of all the things that he could have asked for, give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people. He must have already seen how frustrating the people of Israel could be for a king when he watched his dad. The Israel people could drive you crazy, even to the best of them. Just ask Moses. And not knowing what to do can also in our life drive us crazy, doesn't it? When you have something in front of you, something you're trying to fix, something that's broken, you imagine how frustrated we get. You know, sometimes I say I almost lost my religion. Maybe I lost my religion 2 or 3 times in this project. You just want to understand, what do I need to do? Let's just accomplish this task. Well, it wasn't just any small tasks that Solomon was appointed with. He was king of the largest nation on the face of the earth. And he knew that at this point in his life, it wasn't even his. You see, at the end of verse 9, he says, "For who is able to judge this great people of yours?" Highlight that, underline that. Solomon knew, I am not the one in charge at this point in his life. This is your people. And I know that I'm going to stand on this throne like my dad did, and I'm going to have to make all these decisions. But God, this is your people. Give me this understanding in my heart so that I can make the right decisions for you. Many of our prayers, even Eli tonight did it, but even when I say prayers before a speaker gets up, what's one of the things that we typically hear? You know, we hear people say, "Lord, please be with the one who's going to speak tonight. Give us understanding, give him an understanding of what he's going to say, give us understanding of what he has to say." Because we all want to know what's right. We all want to know the truth and what to do. Well, Solomon says, "And when I am your ruler, when I am the ruler over the Israelites, your people, help me to have this understanding." And so God was very impressed with Solomon's attitude at his age. You know, most people at that age have a lot of things they want. Understanding would not be something they would ask for, but that's what Solomon wanted. And Solomon knows that no one on earth is capable of doing a job that wasn't built for a man in the first place. It was built for God. God knew it, but because of the people's hard heart, he gave them what they wanted. And God would love to have taken the job over, but because he knew that the people would no longer look to him, he put these men in his place to stand and to be the judge. Solomon showed great humility when he first became king. But this is soon going to change. When we look at verses 10 through 15, it says, the speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. I'm going to get glasses. Then God said to him, because you have asked this thing, you have not asked life for yourself, nor have asked riches for yourself, nor have asked the life of your enemies. But you have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice. Behold, I have done according to your words. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after you. And I have also given you what you have not asked for, both riches and honor, so there shall not be anyone like among you, the kings of all your days. So if you walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. Then Solomon awoke, and indeed it had been a dream. And he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, offered up burnt offerings, offered peace offerings, and made a feast for all of his servants. Solomon got what he asked for, and then some, because he pleased God. He asked for this understanding to discern judgment on God's people. When we are young, we have this tendency to react before we think, don't we? And I think Solomon knew, growing up into the palace, the life that he had gotten to live up until that point, maybe he was afraid. Maybe he was afraid that the way he was going to act was not going to be the way that God would be pleased with. So he asked for this great thing. This is a character of a righteous person. A righteous person wants understanding. They want the truth, and they want to tell others the truth, and always be truthful with God. A righteous person wants the understanding that God will watch over us, that God will take care of us 24/7. You look at Psalms chapter 14, verse 2, it says, the Lord looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek God. Every single day in our lives, we should focus on the one who we're trying to get to in the very end. It's very important. If any of us is going to get to heaven, we must seek to be after the person who rules over it. Solomon started out rightly. The Lord gave him great wisdom to serve his people, and he was very righteous in front of the people. Did many things and showed his wisdom to where that everyone was impressed. In verse 12, he says that I will give you a wise and understanding heart, such as the world has never seen and will never see again. Wise. He was wiser than anyone who sits in this room. He was a lot wiser than the person who stands behind this stage right now. He had the ability to know what to do when problems arise. Plus, as a bonus, God will give him riches. He will give him honor, such that no king has ever possessed or will ever possess again. But God would not lengthen Solomon's days, because he gets 40 years just like his dad, just like Saul. Why? Because he refused to do simply what God said in verse 14, which says, if you walk in my ways and you keep my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. You could almost say that God gave him the recipe to follow, but Solomon, with all of his wisdom and all of his understanding, he couldn't follow it. God said, keep my commandments, and you will be protected by me as long as your people. You see, Israel, in 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 20 and 21, it says, Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and rejoicing. So Solomon reigned over all the kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. They brought tribute, they served Solomon all the days of his life. In that entire region, there was no one who did not know who he was. Everyone had heard of his wisdom, of his ability to rule the kingdom. Everyone wanted a piece of what Solomon had. And you see there in verse 20 and 21 where it talks about the sand in the sea will be multiplied. Does that sound familiar? Well, that was a promise that God gave Abraham back in Genesis chapter 15, verse 18, when God made that promise to him, who was also having a dream. On the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your descendants, I have given this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. Solomon sees it as God's gift to himself, when actually God told Abraham hundreds of years before, this is what's going to happen to your people. But Solomon rules over for now until it starts to ruin it through idol worship that he allows into this temple. He builds this great temple. We won't get into that. That's a whole nother lesson. 7 years to build this temple. One of the most amazing things to ever sit on the face of this earth was Solomon's temple. Solomon's life was over the top. He had everything he wanted. Even the richest man in the world today is not close to the value of what Solomon's kingdom he had built. You see, he had a gluttonous appetite for life and the things in it. We look in chapter 4, verses 22 and 23 at just the food preparation at Solomon's kingdom, or where he's at, his food preparation for the day. Now, Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour, 60 cores of meal, 10 fatted oxen, 20 oxen from the pastures, and 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fatted fowl. When I read fatted fowl, I wondered if they had turkey. I'm not sure. Not sure what a fatted fowl is, but that's what came to my mind. 30 core of flour. I have no idea what a core is. If I can believe and trust in the internet, a core is roughly, or 30 core is roughly 256 pounds of flour. That would be double that for the meal. That's 500 pounds of meal. The guy made a lot of bread. His people, they did not go hungry during this time. They had it all. They had the wealth, they had the food, they had the prosperity, and sin was coming in. As his popularity grew, his gluttonous behavior of more and bigger and more extravagant lifestyle grew as well. And these people were bringing in false idols, false worship. He built stalls. He built, in verse 26, he built stalls for his horsemen, 40,000 stalls. He also had 12,000 horsemen, so he had plenty of extra space for all the extra horses and all the extra chariots. He had the riches, he had the wisdom, but he did not see it slipping out of his hands. People loved this new kingdom. They gave him wives from all the foreign nations. They brought in riches. They brought in new ideas, new cultures. And as the temple that was built, he allowed these false gods to start entering in and let the people start worshiping. In chapter 11, we see the downfall of Solomon. It says that Solomon's fall was recorded, but it didn't happen overnight, because as he was doing his daily life and as things were just getting better and better and people were handing this stuff to him, he could not see how the more sinful the Israelites were becoming. And we look in chapter 11, verse 6, where it says, Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not fully follow the Lord as his father David did. And this is going to be said by almost all the kings that come after Solomon. The land will be torn into two kingdoms. There'll be a northern, there'll be a southern. In 210 years, there will never be one good king sit in the northern kingdom. And in 320 years, there's going to be hardly any good kings in the southern kingdom as well. Solomon knew what was right, but he still did what was wrong, even with the understanding. Because he was so wise, we learn a lot from Solomon. He wrote a lot. For instance, the Proverbs. He wrote so many Proverbs that we look at on a regular basis in this congregation, that we use in our classes, that teach us, even though Solomon made mistakes, he left us enough information that we can try not to make those mistakes as well. One of those Proverbs in chapter 14, verse 34, he makes a proverb that he should have took to himself at heart. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. All of these foreigners were bringing in these false idols, but Solomon didn't think anything about it. He didn't stop them from worshiping them in the temple. He didn't remove it like his forefathers did, how David removed these, how Saul removed these, how Joshua came in and he tried to remove all these people from God's promised land. And now you have King Solomon letting these people walk back in and bring the things in that they tried to get rid of for so many years. Sin is a reproach to all people. It hasn't changed since the day that he penned these words. Our country just celebrated 250 years. Is there any sin in this country? Is there anything we need to try to get out of this country? Do we not pray on a regular basis, maybe in our lives at home or maybe behind this pulpit? Do we not pray for this country that would you please bring up rulers, bring up people who make laws over us so that we can serve you without any fear of losing our religious freedom? Would they make decisions the way that you, Lord, would want this country to serve you? And you have the verse that Jonathan read earlier from Proverbs 15, 32 and 33. He says, "He who disdains instruction despises his own soul, but he who heeds rebuke gets understanding. The fear of the Lord is the instruction of wisdom, and before honor is humility." Proverbs is full of quotes that start with the fear of the Lord. And every one of them is something we need to embed inside of our hearts because it's wise statements on how we should live. God rebuked him, and he knew it, but it was too late. He didn't have the fear of God in his heart to follow his commands, and his life would not be lengthened. In 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 14, in the very beginning, young Solomon, he says, if you will keep my statutes and you will keep my commandments as your father David walked, and I will lengthen your days. Solomon couldn't do it. Things were gotten out of hand, and he couldn't stop what he had started. And you're going to see a man who had more wives than anyone. Who is going to take over after Solomon leaves? Not his son, with all those wives. How crazy is that? In Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 13 through 14, we have two verses that we have looked at, we have studied, we have heard preachers talk about or quote from their sermons. When he is finished with having all these things, his gluttonous life, he sums it all up and he says, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or whether evil." All these things in his life had got to him, and his humility had completely left his sight. It was no longer his getting on a knee and telling God, "This is your people." Instead, Solomon had built this great kingdom, larger than any kingdom ever, and his humility had left him. But as you see from this verse, he gives us the wisdom to know, how do we please God? This is how we please God. We fear God and we keep his commandments. So what does that mean? What does that look like? Fearing God means, to me, it's not a fear that pushes you away from him, but it's a fear that when life gets rough and you need help, you run straight to God. Running is a way that a child, when a thunderclap is going on, when there's lightning, you as a parent, you remember how your child, you could hear the footsteps as they ran to your room for protection. They are looking for a safe place. Those who fear God, God can hear those prayers when you send them up. I need your help. I'm looking towards you because you are my safe place. And fear God and keep his commandments. When Solomon wrote this, there were 10 commandments that had been written in stone since the days of Moses. In the New Testament, we still keep 9 of those 10 commandments. In John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35, Jesus says, when he's talking to the apostles, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." And then in John chapter 14, verse 15, it says, "If you love me, keep my commandments." Things haven't changed. Solomon says, fear God, keep his commandments. Jesus comes over 500 years later, and he says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. If we want to get to heaven, we will keep God's commandments. Because every righteous person will, when they turn to God and give our heart over to Christ. Obeying not just the commands that are convenient, but the commands that are written in the Bible that we read each day. Solomon, he might not have always lived right, but in the end, he got it right. Fear God and keep his commandments. If there's anyone here tonight who needs prayers from the church, who would like to put on Christ in baptism,